By 1913, Europe's bearded vulture, once a bone-eating giant with a 3-meter wingspan, had been hunted to extinction, wiped out in the Alps by myths of bloodthirst and decades of persecution. Today, after 426 captive-bred releases, these birds circle high above the mountains again. This comeback is remarkable, but it is not simple. Behind that comeback lies a secret. Restoring an apex scavenger to the wild nearly failed, revealing just how fragile even the greatest conservation successes can be. What turned a story of extinction into one of survival, and what invisible risks still threaten this recovery? High in the mountains, the bearded vulture stands apart from every other European bird of prey. Its wings can stretch nearly 3 meters from tip to tip, wider than most eagles, and rivaled only by a handful of the world's largest raptors. But size alone does not define the species. What truly sets the bearded vulture apart is its diet. Up to 90% of what it eats is bone. This bird is an ossivore, evolved to thrive on what other scavengers leave behind. It swallows medium-sized bones whole, letting powerful stomach acid dissolve them. For larger bones, it soars high and drops them onto rocks, shattering them to reach the rich marrow inside. This unique feeding strategy allows the bearded vulture to fill a niche no other alpine animal can, recycling calcium and nutrients back into the ecosystem long after flesh is gone. Yet the same traits that once made the bearded vulture so successful now make its recovery painfully slow. It takes 7 or 8 years before a young bird is even capable of breeding. Most pairs will produce just 1 chick a year, if any. Many will not breed successfully until they are 10. A single lost nest or failed clutch means an entire year's effort is gone. Their lives play out on a different time scale than most birds. Generation after generation, each new arrival is the product of patience and persistence, not abundance. This glacial pace shapes everything about their comeback. Even with perfect conditions, numbers grow by only a handful each season. The slow rhythm of their lives explains why bringing the bearded vulture back to Europe's mountains demands not just ambition, but decades of unwavering commitment. Every chick that survives to adulthood is a rare victory, one that took years and sometimes a lifetime to achieve. Throughout the 19th century, the bearded vulture became a target of fear and suspicion across Europe's mountains. Rural newspapers reported supposed attacks on lambs and even children. In alpine villages, the bird's silhouette against the sky was enough to stir panic. The name Lammergeier, lamb vulture, echoed through local tales, while natural history texts, including those of Gotthilf Heinrich von Schubert, branded it the bloodthirsty vulture. These stories spread quickly, shaping public opinion and policy alike. Regional governments responded with decisive force. Bounty laws were passed from Austria to France, offering cash rewards for every vulture killed. Police decrees authorized hunters and shepherds to shoot on sight. Agricultural associations lobbied for eradication, blaming the vulture for every lost lamb. Farmers, armed with rifles and poison, set out across the high pastures. Poisoned carcasses meant for wolves and foxes were scattered across the slopes, but it was the bone eaters who arrived first. The campaign was systematic, its reach extending from the Tyrol to the Pyrenees. Official records from the period document a relentless tally. Bounty registers list hundreds of payments, each entry a life erased. Museum logs and specimen tags trace the bird's disappearance, marking the last breeding pairs in Switzerland by 1886. In the Aosta Valley of Italy, the final alpine bearded vulture was shot in 1913. By the time the 20th century began, only scattered pairs survived in the far west. By the 1970s, just 70 pairs remained in all of Western Europe, mostly in the Pyrenees, ghosts of a population that once spanned the continent. This was not the work of a single person or moment, but of decades of myth, law, and organized effort. The bearded vulture's extinction in the Alps was a collective act, written into police files, agricultural minutes, and the pages of natural history. The mountains that once echoed with their wing beats fell silent, leaving only stories and specimens behind. By the early 1970s, the bearded vulture was a memory in the Alps, gone for generations, with only a handful of pairs clinging to survival in the Pyrenees. In France, Paul Giroudet and Gilbert Amigues refused to accept extinction as the final word. Their efforts began with hope and urgency, launching the first experimental releases in the French Alps. But the obstacles were immediate and unyielding. The plan was straightforward: translocate adult birds from remaining populations, set them free in suitable mountain valleys, and wait for them to settle. Yet the results were almost always the same. Released adults vanished into the sky, only to circle back toward their place of origin, sometimes traveling hundreds of kilometers. Others simply disappeared, never to be seen again. The instinct to return home overpowered any attempt to anchor them in new territory. Complicating matters, these early projects operated in isolation. Each nation worked within its own borders, with little coordination or shared strategy. The genetic pool was dangerously narrow: 30 captive bearded vultures scattered across European zoos, most unrelated, few ever breeding. No one had yet devised a way to manage pairings or track bloodlines. The result was a series of disconnected initiatives, all hamstrung by the same limitations. Field notes and letters from Giroudet and Amigues reveal mounting frustration. They watched as carefully transported birds failed to adapt, unable to find food or establish territories. Even in captivity, breeding was rare. The species' complex courtship and slow pace of reproduction defied the routines of zoo management. Chicks were few, and most did not survive to adulthood. Without broader planning, every setback felt final. By the middle of the decade, it was clear that conventional methods were not enough. The bearded vulture's biology, its slow maturation, its fierce site fidelity, its need for genetic diversity, demanded a new approach. The dream of re-establishing a population across Europe's mountains would require more than national pride or isolated effort. It would take international cooperation, scientific management, and a willingness to think in terms of generations, not just years. In February 1978, a small group of scientists and park officials gathered in Morges, Switzerland, facing the reality that decades of national efforts had failed. The bearded vulture's return would only be possible through a new international approach. Representatives from Austria, France, Germany, Italy, and Switzerland agreed to pool every captive vulture held in European zoos, just over 30 birds in total, into a single coordinated breeding program. The Frankfurt Zoological Society provided funds to purchase and transport birds, underlining the urgency and scale of the task. For the first time, a blueprint took shape that matched the vulture's biology. The European Endangered Species Program, known as EEP, was established to manage not just numbers, but bloodlines. Breeding pairs were planned using meticulous pedigree charts, tracing the origins of each bird to maximize genetic diversity and avoid inbreeding. No single country could claim ownership. Every egg and every chick belonged to a shared European future. The strategy reached far beyond zoo walls. By 1982, a comparative habitat study evaluated 5 potential release sites across the Alps. Hohe Tauern National Park in Austria stood out, a vast protected landscape with abundant food and minimal human disturbance. This would become the proving ground for future releases. The plan called for young captive bred vultures to be raised together, then released before they could form attachments to humans or to specific locations. Early field protocols outlined how juveniles would be monitored, supported, and tracked, setting the standard for raptor reintroductions across the continent. The scale of the breeding network expanded quickly. Within a decade, more than 40 zoos and specialized centers had joined the effort, each contributing birds, expertise, and logistical support. The Guadalentin facility in Andalusia would become the most productive center in Europe. These institutions operated as a single pipeline, moving eggs, chicks, and genetic data across borders, sometimes in the dead of night, sometimes under the scrutiny of customs officials unfamiliar with the stakes. This continental strategy did not guarantee success, but it created the conditions for it. For the first time, the bearded vulture's fate was not tied to the fortunes of a single country or an isolated valley. Instead, it rested on shared risk, shared knowledge, and an acceptance that recovery would take not just years, but generations. At the heart of the bearded vulture's return lies a process as engineered as any laboratory experiment, yet carried out on the raw edges of Europe's mountains. Each spring, field teams wait for a message from the captive breeding centers. A chick has reached 90 days old, the threshold for transfer. This is the moment when the young bird is strong enough to survive outside the nest, but still too young to fly or imprint on people. The Guadalentin Center in Andalusia, the most productive in Europe, has sent out over 100 chicks in 25 years, each one a product of careful pairings, midnight egg swaps, and tireless monitoring. The journey from breeding facility to wild cliff is measured in hours, but the preparation takes months. Chicks are transported in insulated containers, their vital signs checked at every stop. At the release site, a remote ledge or a purpose-built hack, artificial nests await, designed to mimic the shelter and vantage of a natural eyrie. Most years, 2 or 3 chicks share a site chosen to be close in age and temperament. Human contact is strictly limited. Food arrives through hidden chutes, and staff wear camouflage or masks when intervention is needed. Around the clock, teams monitor health and behavior, ready to step in only for injury or severe weather. As the days pass, the chicks begin to explore their surroundings, strengthening their wings, and learning to recognize the landscape they will one day rule. Before their first flight, each is fitted with a lightweight GPS transmitter, a silent witness to every movement. The hacking method is a careful balance. Enough support to keep the birds safe, enough distance to let them become wild. Every detail is logged. Weight, appetite, social bonds, feeding into a demographic ledger that now spans 4 decades and hundreds of individuals. The result is a generation of vultures that know the mountains as home, but whose first steps are guided by human hands, just out of sight. Over nearly 4 decades, the numbers tell a story of both ambition and restraint. From 1986 to 2024, a total of 426 bearded vultures were released across Europe's mountains, each one tracked, weighed, and monitored from the moment it left its artificial nest. Behind those releases stands an even larger number, 585 chicks successfully reared in captivity, the product of a continent-wide network of breeding centers and zoos. Telemetry analysts working from field stations and labs have followed these birds as they scatter across the Alps and beyond, compiling a demographic record that is rare in its precision. Survival rates from this experiment in restoration are striking. In the first year after release, 88% of young vultures survive. Those that make it past their first winter reach a remarkable 96% annual survival rate, numbers that rival or even surpass the long-standing Pyrenean population. Yet progress is measured in years, not months. It took 11 years before the first wild alpine chick hatched, in Haute-Savoie, France in 1997. That single event was a turning point, proof that captive-bred birds could not only survive but reproduce on their own. Since then, the pace has gathered momentum, if never speed. By 2022, a record 49 fledglings left their nests in a single alpine breeding season. By 2025, more than 100 breeding pairs are established across the Alps, supporting a population of 300 to 400 birds. These numbers confirm a partial victory, demographically self-sustaining in the core, but still fragile at the edges. Each new chick, each successful pairing, is both a data point and a reminder of the long view required for true recovery. In villages that once celebrated the last shooting of a bearded vulture, local pride now centers on their return. In the French Alps, mayors and mountain guides gather each spring to welcome the new arrivals, their speeches filled with references to the vulture as a symbol of resilience and shared heritage. Farmers who once saw the bird as a threat now praise its role in cleaning the high pastures. pointing out that not a single case of livestock predation has been recorded in decades. Tourism boards promote vulture watching trails, and school children learn to identify the birds by their russet necks and diamond-shaped tails. Protection has become a community effort. French authorities have established zones de sensibilité majeure, strictly regulated areas around nesting cliffs where climbing, forestry, and even drone flights are banned during breeding season. These measures are not just tolerated, they are championed by local councils and business owners who see the vulture's presence as a mark of prestige. Conservationists work side by side with volunteers, shepherds, and hunters, sharing data through the International Bearded Vulture Monitoring Network. In the space of a few decades, the bearded vulture has shifted from a target of fear to an emblem of alpine identity, woven into the social and economic fabric of the mountains. Despite the bearded vulture's return to the Alps, the future is anything but secure. Genetic diversity remains critically low, a warning repeated by every population model. Without regular releases of captive-bred birds, inbreeding could threaten the entire recovery within decades. Some scientists have called for urgent genetic rescue, perhaps even introducing genes from distant populations. But the debate is unresolved, with concerns about losing the distinctive European lineage. The list of threats does not end with genetics. Lead poisoning from hunting ammunition, illegal poisoned baits, and collisions with power lines or wind turbines continue to take a toll each year. Toxicology reports from Austria and Spain have confirmed new cases annually, while enforcement struggles to keep pace. In the breeding season, disturbance from climbers or low-flying aircraft can still cause nest failures, especially in regions where the population is thin. The paradox of the Eastern Alps stands out. Despite the highest number of releases, breeding success there lags behind the West, with no clear explanation. Some point to habitat, others to founder effects or subtle differences in food supply. All agree that intensive management is not a temporary phase but an indefinite commitment. The cost is substantial. The LifeGip Act project alone dedicates €13.5 million from 2022 to 2028, sparking debate over whether such resources should focus on a single species. Conservation managers weigh these questions daily, knowing that the line between recovery and permanent stewardship is thin, and that, for now, the bearded vulture's wild future still depends on human hands. Today, every bearded vulture circling Europe's peaks is proof that extinction isn't always final, but recovery is never guaranteed. Genetic bottlenecks and modern threats still demand human vigilance. The future of these bone-eating giants depends not just on science, but on our will to protect wildness. Nature's comebacks are possible, but only if we choose to keep them alive.